Hello, welcome to the Courageous Self-Care podcast. I'm your host, Christina Marlette. On this show, we talk about self-care that goes beyond bubble baths, chocolate, and wine. It is really the self-care that is strategic. It moves the needle. It gets people from a place of drained and exhausted and giving from resentment and bitterness to a place where they are feeling fully alive, energized, able to give to themselves as much as they give to others. And it's important to, when you don't know something, you just don't know it. So you need to seek out what you don't know. And that's why I'm here. I've been studying self-care for years now and have invested one decade and many hours and many dollars into learning about and perfecting self-care. And so that's why I'm here. I love to share what I have learned. And I also love to get other experts who are passionate about the topic to share with you too. So today I have Jeff Couillard. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. So Jeff, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to.
Yeah, well, that's a big question because I'm up to lots of things, as most of us probably are. But my background is in addiction and mental health treatment. And so I spent about 12 years working at a wilderness-based addictions treatment program for youth and families in Alberta. And it was a adventure therapy program. And I started as a youth worker and moved my way up. If you stay long enough in that context, they start to give you the keys and responsibilities. And so I ended up as a manager, and I spent the last 5 years as the manager of that program. And I spent a lot of time thinking about self-care because those are high burnout jobs when you're a youth worker, when you're a social worker, an educator. Lots of those helping professions come with it, a lot of burden of responsibility and a lot of giving of self, and self-care can often take a backseat. And so, the manager of my mission was to make sure that staff were well in the work, because the realization partway through that journey was that self-care is not optional. When you have responsibility, it's part of our ethical practice. And if it's part of our ethical practice, we need to focus on it just as much as anything else that's part of our ethics. And so, shifting actually a little bit away from self-care to building systems of care and communities of care, as opposed to putting this burden on people. It's like, do your shift, but then when you're at home, make sure you get your bubble baths, like you say, or get your vacation in. And so differentiating between the strategies and the tactics of self-care and the priorities and the principles of self-care. And so that's a bit of the mission that I'm on. It's a piece of the work I do in getting this idea of right use of power into the helping professions and into leadership. And so a lot of the work I'm doing now is leadership development and coaching, and also still working in addictions and mental health, doing outcome and evaluation work, but also team training and development. So it's a pretty broad spectrum of things that I'm working on right now. But really my mission in life is to help people change for the better, help people get unstuck from wherever they happen to be and making meaningful change and then building incredible teams. I think life is a team sport. And so I like to help teams function better and live their mission and values and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a big thing. I'm off. So the last couple of years, it's been, full-time entrepreneur, and it's been a blast.
Awesome. I love what you said about self-care being an ethical responsibility. And I totally agree with that. Living where we do, we both live in Alberta, we are so gifted with the basic needs. We're gifted with security. We're gifted with so much, we're gifted with peace and so many resources and abundance of food choices. And we just have so much choice. And then we're also gifted with the ability to go out and seek to educate ourselves. And I was just talking about this with my kids the other day. Because we live here and we have all of those gifts, it is our responsibility to educate ourselves, to behave responsibly, to learn as much as we can so that we can disseminate the information to people who aren't quite as fortunate as us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Beautiful. So what I love to get guests to do on the show, Jeff, is to share a current favorite self-care practice. And I feel like the more we know about self-care, the more we hear about other people's experiences and just their practices and what they perceive to be self-care, the more choice we have, and we can go out and select what works for us. So what's something that you love to do to take care of yourself?
Absolutely. Maybe I'll just digress just a little bit before I answer that question, if that's okay. Just to give you my model of self-care or my thoughts around self-care, because that influences what'll come next. It'll make more sense.
Yeah, sounds good.
So I see, to move away from self-care being bubble baths and self-care being going for a run or any kind of tactic to help. It's helpful for me to think about what are the principles of self-care, what are the domains of self-care. And so I always talk about 4 different domains. And so we can care for ourselves in the domain of balance, right? And we can seek balance and set boundaries and do those types of things. So rest is another bucket. We can find ways to rest. And yesterday I spent some time in the hammock, and that was just lovely rest. Satisfaction is another area of self-care. When I'm satisfied and I'm finding meaning in the things that I'm doing, I can actually work quite hard. And so one of the things around that I find that gets out of balance is we end up working more than we end up playing or caring for ourselves. But if the work is full of meaning and you're finding a lot of significance in that work, sometimes it's actually self-care for me is to get some things done on the to-do list that would be work, it would be considered work. And the last one is support, finding ways to get support from our networks, which is kind of back to that notion of moving from self-care to communities of care. Who can I access for support, and what does support look like in my life? So those 4 domains are balance, rest, satisfaction, and support. And the first bucket, balance, is the hardest one for me. And so that's where I end up practicing the most in. And the self-care practice that's actually been the most helpful over the past few years has been getting really in touch with my values and making sure that I'm aware of what those values look like in practice in my life. And so I'll give you an example of my top 3 values, because I don't know that we can hold more than 3 things in this busy life. And it's purpose and family and fitness. Those 3 are basically all I have time for. And I notice that when I'm really focused on purpose and I'm really focused on work and the family thing is going well, my fitness tends to drop off the radar a little bit. And so I've developed in the past couple of years this kind of habit stacking approach to self-care, where if I'm going for a run, my 7-year-old's going to be on his mountain bike and he's going to be biking along with me while I'm running, so that I'm getting some family time and some quality time with him while I'm meeting those fitness needs. And I've got some colleagues that like to run as well. And so we'll go for a run and we'll talk about business and we'll talk about coaching and we'll talk about something. So I'm getting multiple needs met in one go. And so that's probably my favorite self-care practice these days is running, because I'm blessed. I live out in Cochrane, Alberta, and there's beautiful trails and a river, and I've got a dog, and so she's going to start running here soon. And yeah, so running, so physical fitness is probably the best thing for me these days. But figuring out the priorities and my values has actually been the underpinning of that, so that I can see when I'm congruent or incongruent with those values, because that's where a lot of our suffering comes from, I think, is incongruence and being dislocated from what's meaningful to us or what's important. So that's kind of a meta self-care practice, is taking time to reflect on, the week or two or what's coming up and saying, okay, how am I going to get these 3 values met, or these 3 priorities in my life met? That's been a useful practice.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's so important. And that so aligns with what I like to teach about self-care, is that he said so many things that I totally resonate with. It's so important to consider self-care not as a series of steps, but as a way of being. And that's the transformation I like to work with clients on, is from going from I don't do any self-care to I do some self-care because I should, it's good for me, to I do self-care because, it feels amazing and I want to do it, to I practice self-care as a way of being. It's just who I am. It oozes out of me. I have all of this amazing energy. And that, you're so right, it totally goes with being congruent with your values. So there is that inner work. It's so different to go for a run or do something for fitness because you should, and it's good for you, and to, like you said, make it a habit stack, to be conscientious about it, to be mindful about it, to do it because it aligns with your highest values for yourself. It is spending time with other people. That just makes an incredible difference in the quality of the self-care.
Yeah. And it's, I always go from the perspective when we're changing habits, and this is really based in my work in addictions, is, identity-based habits are the most powerful. I do this because I'm the type of person who is physically fit. I'm the type of person who is present and engaged with my children. I'm the type of person who, works on my passion. Those are a lot more motivating intrinsically than I should go for a run.
Yes.
Those outcome-based goals, even marathons, I've got lots of friends that run marathons, and they train and train and train and train, and they run the marathon, and then they stop training. And then it falls off the cliff because that outcome has been met. And they look around and they're like, is that it? Is that Is that all there is? And I think that
Yes.
that's, indicative of lots of our life when we're chasing goals, when we're chasing, so, got a kind of a love-hate relationship with goal setting. It's a bit of a tangent off of self-care, but, setting a goal says you're not complete until you meet that goal, or you're not, you'll be happy if or when. And like going to that place of identity, which you mentioned, is deeper work, right? We have to be able to connect with that. And a lot of people are disconnected from that. I ran a workshop yesterday, actually, and we were talking lots about needs, and half the room had no idea what their needs were or their values, and couldn't connect with that. And they were givers, they're people that satisfy other people's needs. And so I think taking that time and space to reflect on what's meaningful to us and what we really do value is probably the first priority when we're on the self-care journey, because otherwise it's just, I should go for a run, or I should do yoga. I've tried and failed at yoga a handful of times because I should do this, this would be good for me. But it wasn't aligned, or it wasn't as feasible.
Yeah. And I think it's also so important to find, like you said, that playfulness, that joy in whatever it is that you're going to be spending your precious time on. And while you were talking, it was making me think of these kids I heard swimming in a lake a couple years ago, and the little brother said to the big sister, "Why are we swimming?" And the big sister said, "Because it's good for you, and you should do things that are good for you." And I thought, oh no, swimming is fun, kids. You're doing it because it feels amazing and you're out in nature. And it made me sad. So we need to find that element of joy and aliveness, and exactly being congruent with your values and doing it for inner reasons. And I love that you said, it's because I am a person who values this, and this is the type of person I want to be, so this is how I'm going to spend my time.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Beautiful. I could talk about this all day. However, in the interest of time, we are going to take a quick commercial break, and then we're going to move into the second part of the interview, which is hearing a story of courage that you're going to share with us. So stick around. We will be right back. Hello, welcome back. We are going to move into the juicy part of the interview, which is the story of courage. And just before we get into that, one of the reasons I love to hear different stories of courage is because, as Brené Brown says, courage is contagious. And so many people feel like they haven't done anything worthy. They're not actually courageous. And so they use that as an excuse to let their fear overpower them. But when we hear these stories, real stories from real people who have done either giant courageous things or everyday mini courage to move through, like you were talking about earlier, being stuck or being in habits that aren't serving us, it is so powerful to hear that, because it makes us think, oh, well, that's my situation, and maybe I could use that strategy. Or, oh, I did that. I didn't even consider that to be a story of courage. And so I love to get this energy of courage out there, because I feel like courage is the value and the skill that makes the biggest difference in our lives. So having said that, Jeff, what story of courage would you like to share with us?
Yeah, well, I think, one of the first thing that pops to mind is a couple of years ago when I was managing an addictions treatment program. And so quite a bit of responsibility. You're responsible for the lives of, 50 or 60 kids a year and their families coming through a remote wilderness program. And you're responsible for, 20 to 30 staff at any given time, and lots of money. So there's lots of pressure. And I've been doing it for a long time. And so it wasn't necessarily just the program and the responsibilities there, but there was, how life goes. You get these factors, these forces that start to come in. And so a few years prior to that, I'd been diagnosed with diabetes, type 1 diabetes at the age of 28, which was kind of a shocker. But I'd managed it through physical fitness and exercise and diet, actually, like really restrictive diet, lots of fasting, I was really committed to staying off of insulin because I was stubborn, right? There's no good reason for it other than I was really stubborn at the time. And so something, it's been about 3 years ago. So we just gave birth to our last child, and there was some political things happening with our funder, and there was some internal things happening in the organization that weren't sitting very well. And so it was kind of this perfect storm of stress that had accumulated in my life. And it must have been February or March. And, I wasn't sleeping well. And I wasn't exercising anymore, and my eating habits had kind of fallen off a cliff. And the doctor was like, "You got to go on insulin." So I went on insulin, and that was hard because I'm stubborn. And so when you don't get your way when you're stubborn, things can be a little hard. And so I found myself actually standing at my desk at the office and started to shake a little bit. Like I got the shakes and I started kind of broke out into a cold sweat and walked into the bathroom. I was pale and I was like, what is going on? Because I've been blessed over my life with very stable mental health and health in general, other than the diabetes surprise. So I was like, okay, I'm out of here. So I got in the truck and I started driving home and I called my doctor. I was like, I got to see you. Like something's going on. And I was thinking I'm sick, right? Or thinking that there's something. And I get in there and he kind of takes one look at me and we start to chat a little bit about what's going on and sits me down in front of a computer. And I just do this little screening questionnaire, which I've seen 1,000 of. I'm like, oh, I'm diagnosing myself with diabetes, like not diabetes, with anxiety. And so sure enough, I was experiencing kind of a moderate bout of anxiety, which is really, new to me anyway. But I, being a professional in the field, you feel this, you should be able to handle it. So there's lots of shame and guilt around this. Like, how did I let myself get to this point? And so I guess the courage piece for me came into, I really wrestled with, do I need time off work? Do I need to step back from this place that I love? Right. And I see the circle of courage behind you on the wall, and belonging, mastery, courage, and independence. Those are foundational pillars of our program. And I had so much belonging there. And I had so much need to continue to contribute. And it was a stressful time for everybody, not just me. Mm-hmm. And so the courage was actually stepping back and saying, you know what, I'm not being effective in my role as a leader. I'm not able to show up in the way I need to show up for my team. I'm not able to guide this program. And at the end of the day, that's not in the best interests of our clients. And so I ended up being about a 6 or 7 week leave of absence from the program. And that was really hard for me because purpose is such a strong driver that to kind of idle for 6 weeks and just walk down the pathways in the forest and think, but it was absolutely what I needed. And what I got from my team was a lot of thank yous, because not a lot of leaders do that. Not a lot of leaders show the courage to say, and to be vulnerable and to say, you know what, I'm not doing well and I need some support, right? I need some time, whatever that looks like for them. And so it ended up being, a really positive experience, really hard to do when you're sitting in the thick of it. But the clarity that I was able to get coming out of that, like I still went back to work and I spent another, probably 5 or 6 months there wrapping up my time, because when you spend a decade at a place, you don't want to just walk out the door because you're experiencing a bunch of stress. And so I was able to do a really nice transition out into my own consulting practice, and it's been great ever since. And the realization when I go back to that time, sure, there's lots of factors, stress that's piling up, but there's also incongruence in values. So going back to that piece of being able to have the time and space to reflect, and just taking that time and space for a lot of people is courageous, because you said that there's so many shoulds in our life. There's so much judgment that we place on ourselves for not looking after ourselves. There's so much judgment of potentially other people, or perceptions of judgment, or fear of disconnection, right? What happens if I do say no to this thing? And so, boundaries, I think, inside of that basket that I talked about of balance, boundaries are the most important. And there, being able to say no is actually probably the most essential skill set that anybody who's trying to practice self-care can do, because we will say yes to everything. I'm a yes guy. I'll say yes to 1,000 things. I'll say yes to stuff I know I shouldn't. And I'll do it because I'm passionate, but that is an Achilles heel for a lot of us as helpers. And so being aware of that and being able to set good boundaries, I think, is what pops out for me from that experience. And you kind of know it theoretically, and until I, because I'm stubborn, had kind of gone through that, it didn't really sink in and resonate. But so yeah, that's I guess what comes to mind for me in kind of recent stories of courage in my life, was overcoming that vulnerability that I had as a leader to actually ask for help and to take steps to care for myself.
Yeah, that's super powerful, Jeff. And I think you bring up such an important point from anyone in a leadership position, or who is teaching, or, like you said, giving so much of themselves. I've experienced this too, like feeling like you should do it perfectly because it's what you're teaching, and you should get all of the benefits from teaching it by practicing it yourself. And then the shame that comes from when you aren't able to practice it, or when you fall off the wagon, or things change for you, some chaos comes into your life, like you were talking about. And it's so much more powerful, and this is why I'm sure your team thanked you. It's so much more powerful to say, hey, I'm human too. This has happened, and I'm going to take all the teaching that I've been giving, and I'm going to shower it upon myself and really benefit. And that vulnerability and that authenticity is so much more powerful than someone who gets it right all the time.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that, yeah, I mean, I love Brene Brown. And so the fact that you're quoting her is great. It's, she's got a lot of great stuff and ideas around that. And, from a power perspective, so a lot of the work I do is in right use of power, and is figuring out what our intentions are, but also what our impacts are. Because every leader, every teacher, every helper that I meet has great intentions. They wake up every day and they want to help. And then I talk to clients and I talk to students and I talk to some staff, and they're like, man, my life is not going great. This leader is fried, or this leader is short fused, or this, there's behaviors, there's impact that we have on people that gets misaligned from our intentions. And good intentions are great, but they're not enough. We have to be accountable for our impacts. We have to be able to notice. And in the helping profession, the main vehicle for the work is relationship. Yeah. Right? We do the work. Therapist is a great example. Someone who the sole thing they have is their relationship, but a youth worker is no different. A teacher is no different. They connect as humans. And if we're not connected with ourselves, if we're disconnected from what we need, and we're not able to satisfy those, it's a big leap, and it's a hard expectation for us to be able to meet other people's needs. And so that's where we see the disconnect in these big systems of care that we've developed in society, between the intention of the system and the actual impact that it's having on clients who are accessing it, or students. And so I've spent a lot of time in education, and I see it very, very plainly. And I've actually stopped, to be honest, teaching teachers. I've stopped doing frontline education work, because they nod their heads like, yes, we want to practice this way, and we can't, because the system does not allow it. The system is the burden, and it feels like I'm placing an extra burden on people often when I come in and talk about right use of power, and I talk about impact, and I talk about self-care. And so I've shifted gears. Actually, this year is a conscious choice. In January, I've shifted gears, and I only talk to leadership in these big systems, because they're the ones who have the power to change things. They have the ones who, they set the priorities, they set the mandates, they do those pieces. Because it didn't feel fair for me to come in for a day and for people to walk up and, now I have to do self-care. Now I have to worry about feedback, different pieces of the model. So, so it's been a learning journey for me around self-care in some of these big organizations, where there's power at play, and there's expectations, and there's intentions and impact and all of that. So I continue to figure out kind of the best ways to get this conversation alive, and that ethical, not optional, is really powerful. If it's ethical, then we're going to have to actually talk about it. We're going to have to put it into our staff meetings. We're going to have to check in on it. It's going to become part of supervisions. It's going to be a topic of conversation, just like any other part of our practice. Right? So.
Yeah, I used to be a teacher, so I know exactly what you're talking about. And I did a session. I've done lots of sessions at teachers' conventions, and one in particular, was the self-care was in the title, and there were just hordes of teachers pouring into the room. There was no seating left. They were in the hallway trying to listen. And I said, "What are you all doing here?" And they said, "We're teachers. We need self-care." Yeah. Well, Jeff, this has been absolutely fantastic, super illuminating. I love your story of courage. I love the teachings you gave us and shared with your buckets, and your approach to self-care, and how it's ethical, and our responsibility to practice self-care. It's all landing beautifully for me. So I hope that the listeners are feeling the same way. And if people are interested in learning more about your practice and your processes, where can they find you?
Yeah, probably the best way to find me is at jeffcouillard.com. And so I can send you that link, and you can just kind of throw it in the show notes or in the description. But I also put together, so I pulled some stuff from some workshops that I do run on self-care. And so I've got a bit of a self-care assessment that walks people through assessing how they're doing in those 4 domains. And so there's a few questions under balance and rest and satisfaction and support, just to give a bit of a framework and a roadmap for people if they're thinking about their self-care, and where they might be doing really well and where they might have some shortfalls that they can use as an assessment. And then a couple pages of kind of a process to set really concrete self-care practices and goals in the short term. So it's kind of a useful handout that I use that people find useful. And because most of your listeners are probably on their mobile devices and not at a computer, they're probably hopefully out for a walk or doing something refreshing. I've actually got a phone number that they can just text the self-care, all one word, to 1-855-969-5300, and just reply to the text with their email address, and the handout will come their way, and they can kind of a do-it-your-own pace kind of thing. But if they do go to jeffcouillard.com as well, when they do land at a computer, I just launched a little mini online course called Get Unstuck. And it's only about an hour's worth of videos and a 10-page workbook. So if you are feeling stuck in some area of life, these are some of the principles and kind of high level, how do I see where I'm stuck and how do I take action? And so it's really designed at that front end of, okay, I just realized that I'm stuck. Now what do I do? And so some really practical strategies to get moving. It can be found in that course as well. But definitely this self-care handout it would be super practical and useful for people to take a look at.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing those resources. And listeners, I encourage you to access the information as Jeff was talking about. If we try to do it all ourselves, it's not self-care. We need to go outside of ourselves and learn what we aren't practicing. And so these resources are a great way to get a baseline level. And so I encourage you to text that number or go into the show notes and get the link to Jeff's website, get that resource, because the only thing that can change is doing something. The only thing that can help you change is to do something differently from how you're already doing it. And resources like this will provide that impetus for you. So Jeff, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate you taking your time to share your passion and your expertise with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me on, and good luck with everything that you're up to.
Thank you. You too. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. I feel so honored to have spent this time with you. I honor you for taking time out of your life to practice this courageous self-care by getting informed. I encourage you to take embodied action, something I talk about, one of the skill sets of courageous self-care, by using parts of your body to type into your phone or text and get the information and take action on the resources that Jeff is offering you. If you are interested in sharing your story of courage, I love having guests on the show. So please do go to my website, which is also in the show notes, ChristinaMarlette.com, and apply to be a guest. The more stories of courage we get out into the world, the better place it's going to be to share our passion and our purpose and our energy. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to connecting with you again next time. Bye-bye for now.